What's up, guys? Hot Noob here. This is episode number 4 of Hot Noob's IT Programming Crash Course from Noob to Voob. In this episode, we're going to be going over an introduction to CSS, cascading, style sheets, or whatever. It really doesn't matter what it's called. What matters is you're probably going to be using it. It's part of HTML to a degree. You can't really use HTML without CSS these days because it's so ingrained in every mixed and matched, and it's all one blurb and one blurry thingamajig in websites. Let's keep with that. So, in the last episode, we have localhost episode 03 index.html. I'm just going to keep with the same folder because I'm just going to continue on from the last episode in terms of the file. So, I tried to limit using CSS in the last video, but yeah, I failed miserably because CSS is unfortunately really ingrained into HTML these days, and HTML is basically, well, it might as well just be called XML at this point, because this portion is mostly CSS. The style equals, and honestly, that's what HTML's become. It's become just this little bit of thing. So in the last video, though, I can add on to this. We did add the script tags and the style tags, and let's take this one step further, and we're going to create a style file, and we're going to call this style.css, and we can import this into our file, our HTML file, just in case we want to be special. And to be honest, it's just mainly for performance reasons and organization, but so we can move our stuff out of the style tag and into another file. Now, unfortunately, you can't just be like style ref or something. Like, this would make too much sense, or whatever, or, file or whatever. Sorry, I guess source would make more sense. Equals style.css. You have to go on Google because I always forget this, how to do this. Let's just Google this right now. Link CSS. Because I can never remember it. Oh, here we are. Like I said, everything is very, traditional, and a lot of it doesn't make much sense. So you have to use a separate sort of tag to, really, we can't even just do, style. We have to use this weird link tag, which is really old, and basically, for the most part, this is the only use that the link tag has, 99% of the time, which is linking a style sheet. So, anywho, enough rants. Oh, they even use ref here. So we're going to use the link tag, which I can never remember. You probably don't even need the rel thing. You could just do link ref, but like so. And then now we've included our style sheet into the file here, and we can be all fancy and have it in a different file. Whoopee. This is also great if you want to just be lazy and import someone else's style sheets instead of programming your own or whatever. I think one that kind of makes sense to import but is actually pretty heavy is the Twitter Bootstrap Css. A lot of people love to just import that into their code randomly because I've noticed the Twitter Bootstrap CSS fixes a lot of default behaviors in browsers which are really annoying, and you really just have to watch out for, and you only really learn through doing it over and over and just through experience. Anywho, for the most part, we're not going to do this. There's really no point because, we're programming and stuff. Usually what I like to do is I just, because I'm lazy or whatever, and I'm always, wherever I'm editing, I'll just plop in a style tag, and then later down the road, I'll go in and I'll put it in a separate file. But that could be a bad habit. Some of my files get a little bit lazy and my code gets a little bit messy when I do it this way, and I do forget to, put it in a separate style sheet. Organization, that's an art on its own when it comes to coding, and you can do whatever you want. Usually what I'll do personally, and I'll just do like main or common.css, just like so. So in this case, for an example of something in common, we'll put in something that fixes, say, a browser's default behavior, which is body, and then margin 0, and padding 0. And the reason why we're setting it to 0 is because by default, a lot of browsers don't set it to 0, and it really should be set to 0. So it's sort of an experience thing. While we're at it, well, what did I just write here? I wrote body. What does this mean? Well, this means we're selecting the body tag, and essentially we're applying the style attributes. Margin is 0 and padding is 0. That's sort of our CSS. I should go into this in more detail. So in CSS, this is our attribute, what I have highlighted here, and then we have our colon. So margin equals 0. Whoopee. Padding equals 0. Now, what is margin padding? Well, I guess we should get into that. This is sort of like CSS territory. Maybe it's HTML territory. Who knows these days? It's all the same thing. So, let's just do this right underneath our hello world. We're going to create a divider here, and we're going to call this test div. And in this test div, I'm going to add a style attributes, and we're going to set the padding to 1px. Oh, you can't really see something. So let's make this a little more obvious. Let's set it to 100 pixels. So if we refresh this, whoa, our text is all of a sudden 100 pixels down, 100 pixels from the left, 100 pixels from the bottom, and if I were to put something else, 100 pixels from the right. Let's take this one step further. Well, I mean, now you know what padding is, and then, oh wait, what's margin? Huh. What is margin? Oh my gosh. Now we have to make this all visual. So I'm going to do something here and say border 1px solid black, and then background color. Let's make this pink. Yeah, it's messy. It's all in one line. Okay, so we've just created this gigantic box. Well, I guess there's not 100 pixels to the right because this is in the wrong display mode. This is where it gets crazy. Inline. Then you have the display modes, and that's like, whoopee. Oh, now we have a block, and we need a new line because when it's inline block, the display mode, which you know what, I'm just confusing you right now. I'm just gonna not even explain that because that's too much for you to learn in one day. This is too much going over tradition and grossness of HTML. Alright, so this is kind of a mess. Let's finish talking about margin and padding before we continue on to making this more pretty. So now I'm going to add in margin, and I'm going to set this to 100 pixels as well, and let's refresh. Whoa, the whole block shifted. So what's the difference between margin and padding? Very simply put, if I go inspect this, you can even like highlight some of this. The margin is outside of the element, or the divider in this case, and the padding is the inside. So in this case, it is, for margin, is 100 pixels to the outside of the border, and padding is 100 pixels more or less to the content within the border. All right, before we get too crazy with, playing around with style sheets, what I'm going to do is show you what makes dividers and spans basically the only thing you actually need in it to know in HTML. We're going to set this to, say, ID equals test div. Now we're going to go to our style sheets area or portion or whatever, and we're going to put in hashtag, which is the ID selector symbol, test div, and then our curly brackets open and close. Put in our stuff, and let's make this all pretty and readable and add some multi-lines to it. Something to be aware of with our attributes, there's a couple ways of doing this. I've never done this myself personally, but some attributes will let it, some won't. Some things you can do. I guess, yeah, you could make it all pretty in the style tag and whatnot, but oh well. Something to keep in mind. JavaScript has to be a single line, unfortunately. You'll learn this with time. Anywho, let's get rid of this. So we've set our divider ID to test div, and then in our style sheets or CSS, we've set our selector here to being test div, and we're saying apply all of these CSS attributes to our select div or properties to our selected div, and in this case, it's test div. All right, we just convoluted things. Well, let's take this one step further. And we're going to put a divider within a divider. Test div 2. And let's refresh this. Oh, why didn't it do the same as the other div? Well, because it wasn't selected. So now say we want to edit the divider within divider. We can do this a bunch of ways. One is we can say test div. Now we can put a space here, and now what we're doing is selecting a child within the test div. So the div within the div. And we're going to say div as our selector, which is just selecting for any old divider. And we're going to say background color blue. Save that file, go back here, refresh. And I can't read anything, so while we're at it, let's just do color, white, or whatever, some brighter color. So test div 2. So now we've selected the div within the div. Now things kind of get more complex, don't they, and confusing, and this is where you can be creative with your organization, and you can do all sorts of funky things with this sort of thing. Now, obviously, this is not so great in some situations. Say you're programming something and you're like, oops, I want to move that div somewhere else. And if you do, oh no, it's gone, it's lost its formatting. How do we fix this? Well, instead of using the div divider because we're lazy, we can come back to the div and say, give it another ID of test div 2. Now this becomes a little bit tedious giving everything a different ID. So there is another selector. And I'm not going to go into compatibility here, so we're just going to ignore the fact that you could also just do IDs in a similar way. We're going to say class equals. So what's our class? Our class is like a bulk selector, and it's a bulk ID. That's in style sheets, that's basically the way to think about it. It's a group of objects, a group of dividers, a group instead of a single item, whereas ID typically, when you're selecting something via ID, it's only one. You should only have one thing of this ID. Whereas with a class, you can have multiple things of the same class. So I'm going to call this class equals test div. Oh, that's going to be confusing, isn't it? Oh, well. Then we're going to go back up here and period. The period symbol or the decimal or whatever is the selector for class. So dot test div. Now we're like, what's this confusing stuff? As you see, this is the selector affecting only the class, and this is the ID selector affecting only the ID. Confusing, huh? Good. So now we have some formatting to this divider, and let's move it back around, put it back in. And, whoa, the formatting didn't change. How very magical, and, well, it does behave differently. Again, this is very experience-based. Now, let's say you want to apply something to every div on your page. Typically, you won't be doing this because it's not the greatest. Padding, 3px. We're going to put 3 pixels of padding around every divider. Boom. So we have 3 pixels. Now, why didn't this one here revert to 3 pixels? Because there's a hierarchy with things. The more specific and further down the hierarchy, the more like the attribute will be overridden. So if I get rid of padding here of 100, it sets it to padding 3, which was at the very top of the hierarchy. So just something to keep in mind. Now, sometimes you got to hack something in, and this is typically not the way you want to do it. But say you really don't want to go back and, fix code and whatnot, and you don't want people to be able to like overwrite. Actually, say you're having an argument with another programmer and you're like, nope, we're doing it this way. Well, you're going to set your attribute here to be exclamation mark important at the very end. And then it's harder to overwrite. And then the other programmer is going to be, nope, I want the 100 pixel padding on my elements. And then it's back to that. And I've never tried this. Let's try this right now. Double important. No, it's limited to 1. So this is typically if you're hacking something, if you just want to like inject something in lazily, you really don't want to do this, and you really just want to avoid using the importance, because you can only go 1 level deep with it. And it's kind of bad practice. This is if you're hacking something. Say you're editing in a website, or you're making a plugin or whatever, and you're trying to override some CSS on a website, then that's when you would do it. If you want to do like custom style sheets or whatever. Anyways, we can get in that much later. Okay, so we've gone over our tag selector, which is with nothing in front of it, our ID selector, which is with the hashtag in front of it, our class selector, which is with the dot in front of it, and we've even gone into selecting the children of the selector. So let's do something, say, more real world. We're going to see, we'll just call this nav. So we're going to add the attribute of ID equals nav, the attribute of ID to our table data. I think I forgot to mention that. The TD stands for table data. Just not that it actually matters, it's just a neat fact. Anywho, we're going to go into our style sheet here. ID, selector, nav, open her up. And we're going to say, let's do something you would probably do. Font size, 14 pixels. Cool. Now, you'll notice a lot of these like attributes that I've been using, I'm just pulling them out of my head. So where do you learn this stuff? All you have to do is say CSS font size, and it'll tell you something. You'll probably end up going to W3 Schools. W3 Schools has been around since forever, really, since the 90s. I think around 2000 or something. I'm not sure, but that's about when I found them. And this made programming in HTML so much easier. Anyways, these guys will explain the different CSS attributes or properties that you can use for various things, and they more or less mostly apply to divs and spans and whatever. There are some attributes that only apply to specific elements, but for the most part, more or less to the divs. And there's some things you can do these days that you couldn't do in the old days, like putting a div within a link. So let's do that right now, and I'm just going to show you. I know we're getting off topic, but ahref equals stuff.html. You can, sorry, I'm just doing this the lazy way. You notice I have no, for the attributes, I have no quotes. You don't necessarily need them if you have no space. However, this is kind of bad practice. You can also use single quotes. The reason for switching between single quotes and double quotes in HTML is, say, if you want to put like a file with a double quote in it, like stuff.html with a quote, which should not really happen, but just so you know anyways. So stuff HTML, and then I'm going to put the tag here, closing, so that our div here, our divider, is contained within our link tag. And then if I go and click it, brings me to stuff HTML. Turned it into a gigantic link and whatnot. Okay. Anyways, we were doing something more real world before I got a little bit off topic there. We have our nav here. We set our font size to 14 pixels. And let's say we wanted to give our nav a title. My nav bar as an example of a title. And we're just going to give this a line break here. A little bit OCD. And we have our nav bar there. And now we want to apply some CSS or some styling that only applies to, say, the link, for example. And, well, we don't want to go and say, oh, go for every link and be like, oh, class equals my nav link or whatever. We don't want to do that. We just want to be lazy and just be like, all right, every link in the nav section, we're just going to control that now and assign it something like color pink. And save that, refresh. Oh, look at that, our girly nav. I wonder if they have a hot pink here. Hot, yes they do. Okay, we can do hot pink. Perfect, there we are, our Barbie website. And you know what, let's make this all bold. Font weight, bold. Font weight is how you do bold, and there is actually, you can do numbers, you can do words, for the most part, like bold, bolder, bold. For the most part, you're just going to be doing this. If you're getting like really artsy, you might want to be like, oh, let's do font weight 400. This browser doesn't even do 400. Let's do font weight 700. Make it even bolder. Font over 9,000. Let's see that. No, you can't even go at 9,000. We broke it going over 9,000. I'm not sure what the range is for boldness, but apparently it's not very high. You might as well just do bold. Alright, font weight bold. Now, let's say font weight normal, because we just want normal links. Kind of weird when you have bold links. That's kind of cringy, isn't it? Notice by default when you have a link here, it's there's this weird underline stuff. I mean, this is 21st century here. It's not 1990s. We don't really like that sort of thing. So to get rid of that is simply text decoration and then typing in none. That'll get rid of your underline by default. Oh, that nav. We've got to spice that up a bit. This is... Alright, Style Sheet 101. How to make things pretty. You put white space in. Now, I didn't really go into much detail. I think we were interrupted earlier in the video. We can just do, say, padding 10 pixels, for example, and voila, it does it here. But let's say we only want padding on the left. How do we do that? Well, I'm just going to do never eat soggy worms. It's as it is, north, east, southwest. North, east, southwest. North at the top, east on the right, south on the bottom, west on the left. Just as if it were a map. On the north, 0 pixels. On the right, east, never eat, soggy worms. On the west, we want 10 pixels. Or on the left. There we go. That's how we specify for the padding to be on the left or whatever. Now, maybe you're a noob and you don't want to memorize that, and you can just go padding dash left and do 10 pixels. Something that did not work when I was learning to program as well. And, you know, you can take this one step further. How about we just do padding left at 100 pixels and then we do normal padding 10 pixels. What's going to happen? What do you think? It's going to be 100 pixels on the left and 10 pixels on the rest. So you can see that. Let's go background color green. Oh, wow, that's pretty gross looking. Let's get rid of that, eh? So this is basically it to your style sheets. A lot of this is experience driven. I'm going to show you one more common one here, which is Yeah, I'll show you one more comment here, one which I like to use a lot. It's a newer one. It's just border radius, and I'm going to set this to 3 pixels so you can see what it does. Sorry, yeah. Okay, there you go. So you can see here the blue div has a border radius. You see the corners. It's basically all it does. It makes it more rounded, the corners. It's great. Okay, so I'm going to show you one more thing, which is sort of the status selector in style sheets. So in this case, we have nav, and we're going to select our A tag, and we want the status of hover. So while the mouse is hovering over this tag, which is what the status selector is, we're going to say background color black. Sure. And here it is. And we see it's all kind of gross and whatnot. And what makes everything look better? We just add a little bit of space in it. A little bit of padding. There we go. Looks kind of better. Let's change this to inline block because now you see it does something weird. There we go. That's what we want. See, really the default behavior of everything should mostly be inline block, and this is where like our legacy HTML thing becomes like a problem and whatnot. We could go to the body and say display inline block, and really? No. So this would be an example of something like A, and we want our default behavior to be inline block for everything because okay, come on. Alright, I'm pretty sure we've run into a caching issue, which is another reason why I don't develop. Which is another reason why I do not develop using files, because you have to, yeah, that was a caching issue. So you have to get the browser to uncache the one file that you're using all the time. And, you know, it used to be you could just do Control F5, but these days browsers don't listen. They just cache everything, cache it all the time. So that's another reason why you should just develop within one file that's not going to be cached, and then later move it to your style sheet so you don't have that crazy headache. Anywho, that's basically it for style sheets. If you want to know how to do something, honestly, you just got to play around with it, practice a little bit, and whatnot. There's all sorts of ones. Like, just think of, like, okay, let's see, CSS blink. And you can just read around and, okay, reading around here, we have Webkit. So anytime you see Webkit, this just means that it's like newer. And in fact, if you just wait a little bit, like a year or whatever, this animation thing will become, say, more mainstream. So Webkit is just kind of less compatible. So let's take this another level. And we're going to just Google CSS Compatibility, just so you know. Caniuse.com. Okay, sure. This is a great website, caniuse.com. This handles a lot of our problems here, and we can see, okay, it works in Internet Explorer, works in all of these browsers, so you can kind of use it. And you see here it says animation name, so you no longer need the Webkit and just do animation name. Webkit just means it's like specific to the browser, so avoid using Webkit. Because it's not going to work on every browser, and that's a whole other thing. You're only going to learn about browser compatibility basically through experience and being patient and not, honestly, just not jumping on the latest CSS attributes that you can use. So here's a common one, opacity. And opacity, as you can see, it wasn't supported in Internet Explorer for like the longest time, and this is a pretty cool website. So around 2010, you could start really. Oh, even here, Samsung Internet Browser didn't support opacity till like 2016. So this is only recently gotten full compatibility across all the browsers. Only recently, but you can use it now. Great. So might as well do opacity. So this is actually a really good one to use for a hover, which is opacity equals 1 or so. And then we set our opacity to 0.75. And opacity is your alpha. So you see there it faded a little bit. Let's make this more obvious, 0.1. So 0.1 is 10%. So 10% alpha or opacity. And you see, woo! It's all animated and does stuff. This was so hard to do back in the 90s. You had to use JavaScript or some weird thing to get this to work. And now these days you just use style sheets. Great. So you just Google a lot for anything fancy, or use jQuery, JavaScript. I think this is basically it for the end of the tutorial. Let me show you how to copy and paste this stuff and whatnot. This guy provided an example, and let's be a noob and just, oh, you know what, that is too much. Keyframes, blinker, you know what, we only have to move this, blah, and we're just going to add that in, and oh, it kind of does it. Ta-da. Anyways, I just show you how to like be a skid and copy and paste. Sometimes you do it. Alright guys, I think that's it for this video. Everything else you can kind of like figure out on your own, or maybe it'll appear in more videos I'll use it. It's just literally just play around with it, figure out all the attributes. Honestly, what I showed you is 99% of style sheets, and it's own. I don't really use much more than that for my websites. It's just compounding and getting on to crazier levels until you get like a website and it's all fancy and whatnot. And yeah, anywho guys, this is Hot Noob here. Please subscribe.